My name is Kate Neary and I am a Programs Manager at EnergyLab. We are so pleased that you could join us today. And I would just like to give everyone the heads up that this session will be recorded. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that I'm hosting this meeting from the lands of the Darug people. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you all work today. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters. For those of you who may not know us at EnergyLab, we are Australia and New Zealand's largest climate tech startup accelerator and innovation network dedicated to reaching net zero emissions. We build connections between founders, mentors, investors, and peers. And as part of today's session, we are lucky enough to be joined by 3 of our incredible women alumni founders on our panel. This event also coincides with the launch of our 2022 Women in Climate Energy Fellowship, which we'll be launching next week. And I would like to give a special shout out to any of the participants that are here today. First up, we will be hearing from Grace Sai on her very impressive entrepreneurial journey and transition to the decarbonisation space. Grace is the co-founder and CEO of Unravel Carbon, an enterprise software that helps companies track and reduce their carbon emissions, backed by Socquet-Clerc and Y Combinator. Grace was a VC who invested in early-stage tech startups, a Kaufman Fellow, and is widely regarded as a node of the entrepreneurship ecosystem in Asia. She has been nominated by as Gen T by Singapore Tatler in 2018, Great Women of Our Times by Women's Weekly in 2017, and is a UN Women's Entrepreneurship Day ambassador. In addition to her entrepreneurial success, Grace holds 2 master's degrees with distinction from Oxford and INSEAD. Following, I will hand over to Megan Fisher, our CEO at EnergyLab, to moderate the panel. If you have any questions, please pop them in the chat. We are so pleased to be running this event as part of the City of Sydney's Visiting Entrepreneurship Program, a series of free events produced by the City of Sydney with partner organisations like us from the local startup ecosystem to connect high-profile international entrepreneurs with Sydney's tech startup community. The 2022 edition of the Visiting Entrepreneur Program, Future TBD, is kindly supported by Tech Central and the Greater Cities Commission. It includes 10 days of celebrations, 11 global experts, and 17 inspiring and free events to talk about a future to be dreamt, discussed, debated, and debunked. When posting about this event, which we encourage you to do, please use the hashtag VEPSyd, which I will pop in the chat, and also tag City of Sydney and EnergyLab. I will now hand over to Grace. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks, you, Grace.
Kate. And thanks for having me. Thanks to EnergyLab, Tech Central, and GCC for hosting this wonderful program. Obviously, I'm dialing in from Singapore. It's still pretty dark outside, if you can see, but I was in Sydney the past 2 weeks for various events for both Tech Central and the Visiting Entrepreneurs Program. So this is a pretty sort of casual sharing, so we'll just take it as it goes. But maybe I will start with current and then sort of work reverse chronological, if that works. I'm also looking forward to learning from the panelists. I've read their profiles, and I'm just, I think I wouldn't understand half the things they say, but therefore panels like that are always learning opportunities as well. So yes, as Kate mentioned, Unravel Carbon is a climate tech startup. We're only 7 months old, to be honest, or maybe even 6. We started in January on the back of the start of Y Combinator's Winter 22 cohort, and that ended in March. And then we raised the seed round in March. We did a small, like 1 million-ish pre-seed back in December last year. And Unravel is really, our mission is to decarbonize 1 gigaton of carbon dioxide equivalent by 2030 through our work with our clients. We target large enterprises, but work with them to engage with their tier 1 suppliers, vendors, partners, who will then engage with us again to work with their tier 2 and their tier 3, and it goes on. So it is an enterprise software that is for large companies, but it is also super sexy and super easy to use so that small, medium enterprises, even micro enterprises, which we want to serve with a smart and dumb phone version, to be part, of this decarbonization solution. I think for the longest time, we have been stuck in a situation where there are 400 million companies around the world, that makes up this whole 90 trillion global economy. But less than 10,000 companies measure their carbon emissions. And even fewer are doing something about it, right? Like adopting the technologies that some of our panelists are involved in today. So it is a very dire situation just because the problem is increasingly serious. And the people coming into the solution, or the number of actors coming into the solution part, does not equalize the problem at all. So we want to help make decarbonization painless. We want to help decarbonization accessible, and such that it is just a normal everyday thing, just like how companies look at their financials every other week, every month. They make a report and they know exactly where they stand. We want the same behavior to be applied to climate change and their climate data. Essentially, we help companies track and reduce their carbon emissions, focusing on the holy grail of this all, which is Scope 3 emissions, and we focus in Asia Pacific. We specialize in converting accounting data of any company into carbon data in seconds. So this problem is usually solved by consultants, from the Big Four, from other sort of climate consulting firms, and they usually do it manually with, tons of Excels, and it takes anywhere from 3 to 9 months to just come up with a measurement for a company. For a large enterprise client using that effort impact ratio doesn't really make sense, because then, in 1 year, these clients are left with only 3 months to actually decarbonize with the data they get, right? Out of a 9 months exercise, for example. And then the new financial year begins. So just the whole mathematics around this is slightly flawed, we think. So our goal is really to reverse the effort impact ratio and make the measurement part super easy. And that's just one part of what we do. The second part of the platform is a solutions recommendations engine that takes the hotspots from the client's data and proposes automatically a decarbonization pathway to get to their climate goals, whether it's net zero by 2030, whether it's halving that by 2030. And these pathways are focused on the user, but it has, in a sense, like, I want the most urgent pathway, I want the cheapest pathway, I want the lowest effort pathway. Hopefully more people will choose the urgent pathway. And then within those pathways are solutions such as those from our panelists today, including the OPEX calculation, the CAPEX calculation, the decarbonization impact, the IRR and PVs, and later on we'll also be building the MET curve. And then finally, we also help with reporting. So we pre-populate some of the main disclosure frameworks, CDP, SBTi, TCFD, GRI, and we sort of, being nerds, half the team is data scientists, engineers, PhDs in AI, right? So we just take these forms of disclosure, sometimes they're 100 over pages long, and we take every field that needs to be filled and program it to pre-populate itself with any outputs that the engine has. And again, it is all about taking away low value work, like filling up forms, from the sustainability teams around the world, so that, they spend their time actually decarbonizing. So that's what Unravel Carbon is. Yes, we're super lucky to have. We're told that we have raised, the largest seed round ever in Asia Pacific for a climate tech platform. It was a 10 million seed round led by Sequoia and other great funds like Alpha JWC, Rebel Fund, which has the co-founders of Reddit, Instacart, and Cruise. And also prolific angels like Bradley Horowitz of Gmail, Google Photos, Google Docs. So I think my takeaway from having raised that seed round, whether it's as a founder, as a climate tech founder, or as a female founder, is that none of that matters at the end, because everyone knows that capital needs to go into climate tech or climate solutions. When there is the right talent, the capital will come. So I haven't faced any biasness or discriminations or any, microaggressions because I'm a female founder. Um, you know, but we have good traction. We have a good product. We have a good founding team, and that's all that matters. And the climate tech going, like the whole global economy is like going down, right? With recessions, inflations, the war, but climate tech is going up. So it doesn't even feel like the climate tech sector is facing a winter in fundraising. I could be wrong, but certainly in the early stage funding circles, um, investors still need to continue deploying their capital raised. Billions of money have been raised in Asia Pacific by funds, right? So these general partners who have raised from the LPs are under deployment pressure. And climate tech is becoming a vertical that people are looking at, although they may not understand it. So I found that my most meaningful investor relations before they became investors were these sort of deep talks around educating themselves, right? And as a result, we are, for example, Sequoia, India's sort of first climate tech platform investment. We are certainly Rebel Fund's first climate tech platform investment, and also the first climate tech ever anything for investment for Alpha JWC. So it is really interesting to see that it's starting to happen, and hopefully with sort of our case, but more other climate tech startups that have been raising well, hopefully that unlocks a lot more capital. And I just want to share as well, with the time remaining, that I am new to sustainability. I am nowhere as smart or as informed as all our panelists today and as our organizers in the realm of sustainability. I started it last year because my daughter was turning 2 years old. My second company was being acquired by Delbert, a great consulting firm, and we were writing a will for my daughter. And as I was sharing at Tech Central, thing, this is like hashtag adulting, right? Things you do as you grow up. You have to think about legacy planning and wills. I've never written one before. So it was an educational process in itself. And I realized one day I had this wake up call where, what is the point of living these sort of worldly material things to my daughter when the planet she's living in may not even be habitable in her lifetime? It is still habitable in our lifetimes today, but it may not be in hers. When the planet heats up by 3 to 4 degrees hotter. We are right now at 1.3 degrees from pre-industrial temperatures. 80% of the planet will not be habitable. So in Australia, Tasmania would be safe, but probably nothing else. And New Zealand South Island and half of North Island would be safe. That's why you see people like billionaires like Peter Thiel, like people who are informed by these climate science stats, they're already buying properties in South Island, for example. So I think that really propelled me to, think about, do I have a third startup in me? I've exited my first two, nothing crazy, but I've gone through the cycles, right? In building teams, in scaling companies. But it's also nice to semi-retire and be a mom, which I've surprisingly enjoyed. But I think after speaking to the 20 smartest people I know, and asking them that question, right? Like, where can I use my time, talent, capital, resources, networks to solve next? And it was almost unanimous that it was around climate change, and it's around sort of a scalable product-led method around non-financial reporting. So definitely had the imposter syndrome. Like, I don't know anything about sustainability, don't know much at that point. This was back in February last year. But I remember Mike Moritz saying, one of the founders of Sequoia, I remember him saying in a podcast that they actually like proven entrepreneurs that are new in a new sector that they're trying to solve. Because they bring new lenses, they bring new perspectives, and they can do what they have done well before, but in a new sector. And climate change is such a stubborn old problem. It's almost like an ancient problem that still has not, had that scalable solution at scale. So I think it was based on that insight that I thought, okay, maybe there is space for people like us, like me, who have not been an environmental scientist, who have not done a degree in environmental science, to help be part of the solution with the things I know, right? And so, yeah, but my co-founder, who is Australian, Mark Allen, he is the environmental expert. So you do need that, right? I do need that in Unravel. And therefore, that pairing works out really well. So we are basically digitizing his brains, and I take care of the rest, So it's been working out well. And yeah, we were 6 people back in January, and we are 30 now, and we will be 50 by year end. And we hope to be setting up offices in Australia, New Zealand, particularly Sydney. So yeah, maybe we'll all meet in person and cross paths someday. So yeah, with that, I will pass back over to Megan, and yeah, we can chat more on the panel later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Grace. That was just a totally inspiring chat. Really appreciated that. So I wrote down so many fantastic nuggets, some of which I popped into the comments, but what an amazing round you've been able to raise. And I love reversing the impact to effort ratio, because we know movement doesn't happen if the pathway isn't easy enough or the rewards are not great enough. So I think some of the work that you're doing is really so important. But thank you. But let's get on to the panel, because we have a bunch of amazing entrepreneurs waiting to join you on stage. So how about we do that? So firstly, I should introduce myself. For people that don't know me, my name's Megan Fisher. I'm the CEO at EnergyLab, and I'm going to welcome onto the stage some amazing entrepreneurs as well to join Grace too. Now, I've got some questions that we're going to be asking the panelists once I introduce them, but we will also be taking your questions, so do pop them in the comments. Otherwise, believe me, I will suck up all of their time with my questions, because I've got lots, but if you want your own, pop them in the comments. So firstly, I'm going to start with Carola Jones from Everty. Forgive me if I read, because Carola's got an amazing background and I want to make sure I capture at least a proper snippet of it. So welcome to Carola, co-founder and CEO of Everty, an electric vehicle charging network and charging station management software solution. Carola is also a member of the Electric Vehicle Council Australia, and there is lots more about Carola, but we will move on. Also, welcome to Jane Melia, the co-founder and CEO of Harness Thermal, a startup with a mission to bring clean energy to every home and to help transition away from gas, comfortably, safely, and affordably, all very important things. Jane has held leadership roles at multiple tech startups, including Soul Focus, Enervolt, and Quintessential Labs, and has a PhD from Cambridge University. And also an introduction for Camille. Hello, Camille from Bloom Impact Investing, where she is the co-founder and director, a company that's on a mission to build a carbon-free economy, allowing people to invest in climate solutions and learn about sustainable finance so that they can build their own wealth by also making a difference around decarbonisation. And of course, we have Grace, who you have also already heard the story on. So what an incredible panel we have here today. So without further ado, let's kick off and get into the questions. Now, Grace, we've already heard from, but what I'd really love is for the rest of the panel to talk to us briefly, just a little bit more on yourself and about the startup that you've founded. So Carola, I might start with yourself.
Sure, thank you very much. We started Everty about 5 years ago. And as Grace already beautifully explained, like climate change is really the biggest challenge the world needs to address, and with urgency. And so at the time when I started Everty, I was already working in renewable energy and sustainability, but more on the solar and battery side. And then I looked at Australia with having the highest uptake of rooftop solar on individual homes. And thinking about that home with solar on the roof, a battery in the garage, we can actually power our electric cars that we will have eventually from these solar systems, and really remove a lot of emissions from Australia's CO2 account, so to speak. And but back then, no one was really buying electric cars in Australia, and so addressing that was something I believe is really going to have a massive impact. And finally, 5 years later, we're seeing the fruits and the change in the market happening, especially with the new government. They've already, just a few weeks into government, put in new legislations, incentives. They are saying that by 2030, 80% of all cars sold will be electric. So that is a massive amount of cars that are transitioning from petrol to electric. And what we really do need is that infrastructure to support the refueling or recharging of electric cars. And that's exactly what the Everty software does. We help other businesses to own and operate charging infrastructure by creating sustainable business models so they can do that for decades to come.
Fantastic. Thank you, Carola. And Jane, what about yourself? A little bit about yourself and the startup that you founded.
Thank you for the introduction, and it's such a pleasure to be here and with all these other speakers. I love hearing your stories. So I'm the CEO and founder of Harvest Thermal, and my background, a bit like yours, Carola, I spent a while in solar and in energy storage. But the genesis behind Harvest started when I just had my gas furnace was about to die. And having worked in this space, I suddenly realized, I don't really want to put gas back in my home. And I started doing my homework, and I realized, well, actually, buildings are responsible for 1/3 of overall emissions. And how are we going to solve that? They last a long time, they're very distributed, and we need to be comfortable in our homes. And so the personal problem I had about my old gas furnace was then, okay, so how do we find a solution that's going to be comfortable for people, and most of all that people can afford? And I think the climate change problem, it very quickly becomes an equity problem, because to solve climate change, we have to solve it for everybody. And so we have to have solutions that are going to be scalable and work for everybody. So Harvest Thermal is, let's slash emissions from homes, and we do that. We cut emissions by 90%, but let's get those costs down. And we cut people's bills by 40%. And so it really is this transition between equity and climate, which is so important, alongside all the other areas that Grace and Carola are talking about, are the only way that we're going to solve this problem and make it better for our children.
Thanks, Jane. I love that. I think the more and more I look at this topic myself, the more equity is just so important to make sure that everybody gets to, enjoy these amazing solutions. But also, if you don't have them, the economics for you, it's a massive disadvantage, and that's just not fair. Okay, Camille, over to you for more about yourself and more about the startup that you have founded.
Thank you. I'm totally inspired by the other speakers, I have to say. So I started Bloom back in 2019. I also, like Jane, went on my own little journey and faced a problem that I then went on to solve with a company. So back in 2019, I was seeing the huge shift towards renewable energy. And I was excited about clean technologies, and I wanted to invest my own money into these things because it aligned with my values. Unfortunately, investing in clean tech and clean energy is complex and expensive. I wasn't able to find any product that would help me align my savings with a genuine climate impact. So this is the problem Bloom is solving. We democratize climate investing so that everyone can invest to fight climate change. And the thing we're doing differently is that we give people access to investing in clean energy infrastructure. So think solar farm, recycling facilities, all of those things for a long time have been restricted to wealthy, sophisticated investors or institutional investors. Well, Bloom is here to make it accessible because, like Jane, we also think that to decarbonize our economy, we need to take everyone on board. And the most exciting thing about Bloom is that there is a massive impact we can have as individuals. We often feel, I think as individuals, we often feel overwhelmed by climate change. Where do we even start? Is it too late? I'm recycling, I'm doing all these things, but will it be enough? Well, with climate finance and sustainable finance, every individual can have a significant and scalable impact, which is why I'm so excited to build a community around sustainable finance, and that's the purpose of Bloom.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Camille. I think everyone's talked through a little bit of their journey towards becoming an entrepreneur and where they've ended up. But I wanted to just check about, did everyone expect to end up being an entrepreneur when you look back? Did you expect to be here, founding your own company, doing your own thing? Please, I've got no order for this question, so yell out, just start speaking. Who would like to talk about that?
Well, I can give it a go. So it's really interesting because when I went to university, I already started working as a freelancer just to support my lifestyle and my studies. And then I started a corporate career, and then I worked for government. And so after all these things, I found the corporate rat race is nice while you're on that career trajectory, but I wanted more impact. And in the end, I came back to being an entrepreneur because that's when you're in 100% control of your own journey and the impact that you can create. Even working for some of the largest logistics companies in this world, yes, I had a good impact in helping them to reduce their emissions and create CO2 savings in global supply chains, but it wasn't quite where I wanted it to be, and that brought me back to being an entrepreneur.
Thanks, Carola. Yeah, sorry, was that you, Grace? I was going to say, What about you? You've done this a number of times. Did you expect to be here? Was it always your plan?
Oh my God, this it's a green building. Okay, we'll talk.
That's fantastic. We love that here.
No, so very similar story to Carola, a little different. So even when I was young, my parents would always ask us not to just focus on studies, do all the other various things. But I've always been good at studies, and people tend to keep doing what you're good at. And it was really, I knew that I won't join the traditional corporate path, but I didn't know what I want and didn't know what I will do, right? I just know what I don't want to do. I think it took a rejection. So I was in Jakarta in my first job, and BCG wanted to hire me, the Boston Consulting Group. And I passed, it was so difficult, right? The case study interviews and stuff. And I passed all 5 rounds until the end. The managing partner literally said, I don't think you are a consultant, although we would we would offer you if you think you want it. But I think you're more entrepreneurial than you think. So it took that rejection to set me on the other path. So sometimes when, you know what they say, right, when doors close, other doors open, and sometimes it has to like shut strongly at your face. Like I remember crying after that, like being rejected, but like then it, you know, it put me on a self-discovery path.
That's amazing. So he rejected you, but he also gave you a little pearl of wisdom.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. Camille, what about yourself? Did you expect to be here?
When I look back, I can see that I've always been entrepreneurial in my mindset, but I was like Grace. It took me a bit of time to recognize that actually that was the best use of my skills. And I think being an entrepreneur is almost like a destiny. And what pushed me towards it was seeing an insight, seeing an opportunity, but also the duty to do something bigger for climate change. I just couldn't recognize and reconcile my corporate job with my personal beliefs. Mm-hmm. And it's back in 2018 when I read the 5th IPCC report that it clicked. And I thought I really had to dedicate my life to fixing this issue. And a week later, quit my job, joined EnergyLab, got a massive inspiration from spending lots of time with other entrepreneurs. And that would be my tip. If you think you might be an entrepreneur, but you're not sure, spend time with other entrepreneurs. And after a little while, I can assure you that some ideas will pop up and you'll find your own little thing. And you'll find your own little thing that only you can do and create in this world.
That is so exciting. That's so inspiring, Camille. I would say one other tip was, so I also went the big company path for a number of years. But a long time ago, about 14 years ago, I joined a solar startup. I didn't found it, I joined it. But that was my first venture into having a huge impact, having a climate impact, but also having a huge impact where everything I did had an impact on the bottom line of that company and on the strategy of that company. And I've never looked back, right? So I've now been in 5 startups. I would never consider, unless I had absolutely no other way of surviving, I would not consider going back to a large company, because this is what I love doing. This is what, you know, some days are hard, but I couldn't dream of going back. It's just the impact and the interest and the control that I have is just extremely rewarding. So,
but it's really hard, right? This journey. Like my friends would always say, "What, you're self-torturing yourself again."
That's true. You are torturing yourself. I think it's really interesting. So I have only recently, and I'm not an entrepreneur, although I have done a little startup thing on the side, but it hasn't got off the ground. So I cannot put myself in the shoes of any of you amazing, amazing entrepreneurs. But I have come from a corporate background. So there is a big difference. There are definitely risks that you take personally in doing what you do, but there's also risks that you take in corporate, in that you can spend a lot of your time, your life, your weekends, all of your time, and conceivably not have a lot of impact on whatever it is that you're particularly passionate about. So that's a different sort of risk. It might not be a financial one, but it's definitely a time commitment risk. So I get it, and I hear you all saying it. That's what you're all saying. Oh, that was interesting story. Sorry. Okay. Keep doing your job, Megan. Next story. All right. So we haven't really talked about the fact that we've got an all-women panel here. I don't think it's against the rules to have an all-women panel, but let's just run with it anyway. So I'm going to ask a question about that. So what have been the greatest challenges for each of you as a woman? And maybe there haven't been any, and that's okay. That's awesome. Entering the climate tech space as well as launching a startup more broadly. But if there have been, and I know it can be challenging, try and share those stories for others listening so that they can learn. And how have you best overcome those challenges? Carola, we might start with you, please.
Yeah, look, this is such a good question. And I'm feeling a bit conflicted in answering this, actually, because often when we speak about female entrepreneurs or all women panels, we're basically making this as something that is was done on purpose. And suddenly you ask yourself the question, am I on this panel because I'm a woman, or am I on this panel because I know my stuff? And so, and the same goes with when we talk about investors or that female-founded startups get less investment, etc. Sometimes I don't think we're actually doing female founders a service by reducing it to it, but then in the end, it is a reality. I mean, the studies and the figures and the numbers, they all prove that this is the case. So yeah, I really don't know. Like, I don't think that I have like personally been impacted, but maybe I could have raised like 5 times as much, or maybe not, who knows. But yeah, it's good that we're having the conversation. But at the same time, it also, as Grace already said, for her, she's a serial entrepreneur. She's got the knowledge, she's got the team, and she's got the funding. So it doesn't really apply to everyone.
Thank you very much, Carola. I appreciate that. Grace, what about yourself?
You know, I have never faced a direct discrimination action thing, you know. Although I think the biggest thing about this is I start to think how many missed opportunities I would have had because I'm female. So I was a VC before, right? I ran a fund, I raised the fund, ran a fund, deployed a fund, worked with other co-investors who are mainly male investors, right? And there it is very, very stark, the difference. Like, deals are shared in like whiskey bars or cigar rooms. None of which I like. Like, I don't mind being there, but you know, it's the nature of things just as a factor of the people, right? And they don't do it intentionally, you know. It's just who they are, and that's what that gender likes, right? Yeah, I think it's more that question of what could be more, or what could have been, or what would I have been excluded from.
Yep.
Right? The unknown more than the known aggression. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's all about that inclusive nature and some things that you don't know. And there's no doubt about the fact that some of these things are borne out in the figures. So even though you might not feel them personally, or they might not hit you day to day, they're definitely borne out in the figures of women entrepreneurs and the figures of how much investment women get. Jane, what about yourself?
So I guess the good news is there are a lot of female entrepreneurs. I was reading maybe about 70% globally of 7 out of 10. 10 male entrepreneurs, there are 7 female entrepreneurs. So the numbers are not bad. And the statistics showing how female-led or female-founded companies perform is actually very strong. That diversity, gender diversity is, and I think this is well known, a good predictor of success. So that's all the good news. The bad news that we're aware of is that women do not get as much funding. And the question is the why behind that. Very, very hard to pinpoint any particular issue. And I think in many cases, it is an unintentional bias. It is not, you know, I will not invest in women, or at least very, very rarely, but it's unintentional. And that makes it ever so hard to really put your finger on it and really address it. A couple of times, though, when it's been made very explicit to me, it has been pointed out to me by male VCs saying, wow, that meeting, the way you were treated, I have never seen a man treated that way from a male VC. Or another one saying, Jane, we know you're smart, but you have to lay it on really thick because they're going to assume you're not so smart. And so just a couple of things which I'm definitely making sure I practice. And of course, I've got a very thick skin and I just keep going. But I've hearing this from some of the male VCs who are coaching me and who are seeing what's happening. And I think, you know, it is what it is. You know, when I think back, I think my grandmother couldn't vote. My mother had the choice between being a teacher and a nurse. I have all these opportunities and it's phenomenal. And I just want to make sure that it's even better for my daughter and your daughter, Grace, and all our daughters. And it's going to be fine. We just keep pushing. I also know if we don't push forwards, it slips back, as we're seeing in some parts of the world right now. Things can slip back if we don't push. So let's all keep pushing. Make it better.
Thank you, Jane, for sharing those stories. I think that's, and Camille, I will get to you in a second, but I think it's important to be positive because there are things that deserve for us to be incredibly positive. There are incredible strides being taken, but there are also negative things, and it's okay to talk about the negative things, because then for people that are facing them, they get to share in them, they get to understand them, and they get to realize that they're not alone. So that's really important. Thank you, Jane, for sharing those. And Camille, what about yourself?
I love what Jane just said. I'm just going to share as well that for me, being a woman has been a blessing and a curse. And I'll explain why. The curse is to be asked definitely more about risks than my male counterparts. I evolved in the financial industry, hugely male dominated. And like Jane, I have faced situations where I have not been taken seriously and people have been condescending to me. But my way to respond to this is with, I guess, being always prepared and proving people wrong with the amount of research and just being a serious, business person. And I think you can turn these people quickly around by just showcasing your skills and your business progress. The blessing is also, as a woman, if you evolve in a male-dominated industry, you stand out. People are like, oh, that's different. And you can get amazing sponsors. I've been really lucky to have met some, I guess, male professionals who actually went out of their way to sponsor me. And I know that they've done this because I'm a woman. So, like I said, it can be a curse, but it can also be an amazing asset.
Thank you, Camille, for sharing those. And thank you to everyone for sharing those stories. Greatly, greatly appreciated. Now we're moving on to stories of decarbonisation. I've got a quote from Grace. So Grace, forgive me for quoting you back to a panel you are on. Are you ready? I hope to do it justice. I always observe what's needed in the world for the next 20 or 30 years and ask what's missing. If there is white space that hasn't been served and you can uniquely serve it, that is a propelling opportunity for you to create a long-lasting legacy and impact. So the question is for the panelists. What do you see as currently being those biggest areas of white space? So in others, what are the greatest areas of opportunity for people listening to go after in the decarbonisation spaces? Jane, we'll start with you on this one, please.
Okay. Wow, there are so many, but I'm going to talk about a space which is adjacent to one that I'm working in, and therefore it's one that I'm aware of. So when we think about buildings, I'm thinking about technology and how do we electrify. The practicality is there are millions and millions and millions of homes out there. And how are we going to change them? Just practically, how are we going to scale a transition that impacts so many people? And that is just a very hard problem. It's a very, and yet it has to be done, right? We cannot continue burning gas in our homes and hope to address the climate. At least we can't do it at scale. So that's one. And it's also tied to the overall equity piece. How do we find ways as a society to help the transition? We all benefit as a society if everybody can make the change. So how do we, and I think different countries and different places are going to have different approaches, and hopefully we'll learn best practices. How do we find a way to do it? We're all in this together. So it can't just be well-meaning, well-off folks solve the problem and nobody else does. It's just not going to work.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jane. And Carola, what about yourself?
Yeah, it's interesting when I look at my own industry, being electric vehicles. I guess there's always two ways. You can either have a top-down approach or you can leave it to the market to create it bottom-up. And what we've seen in the EV industry is obviously both do work, but where there was a top-down approach, namely in China, where the government said, okay, we don't have a long history of making cars. So if we're going into making cars, we make them all electric and we become the experts in that. And China is by far the biggest EV market in the world. Whereas you see in Europe, all the automakers are now whinging and screaming and crying over petrol cars being phased out, and they're saying we don't have enough time. And Europe has only suggested to stop the sale of petrol cars by 2035. So we've got 50 years to just change what we do. And the market will change much quicker, but you still have that old entrenched thinking, and people are not pushing for the same things at the same time. And so, I really hope that we can maybe find a better balance of how government can support the private sector for a quicker transition.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Carola. And Camille, yourself.
Yes, I will go very quickly. So in one word, finance, huge gap. When you read the IPCC report, it says we need to increase our investments 7-fold compared to current levels if we want a chance to maintain global warming to 1.5 degrees. That's roughly 2.4 trillion every single year until 2050. So how do we move this money to the right places? I think there's a huge gap and so many opportunities.
That's amazing. That's just the little brain exploding emoji has just occurred for my head. That's an incredible amount of money, and it just can't come from the same old sources. I love that as a thought. And Grace, it was your quote, but I'm going to put it back to you. What are the white spaces? Where are the opportunities around decarbonisation?
You know, I do think that those of us in the audience who will never be an entrepreneur, right, which is absolutely fine as well. I think the white space there is in asking your current companies, what are they doing in their decarbonization journeys? Have they made a goal? Is the goal does the goal come with a plan? You know, not just an empty promise, which is very often. So I think every individual just asking and demanding, right? Like you can be demanding, you know, to your companies, to any associations you are affiliated with, and start asking that question. So that's one. Then for the small group potentially who are entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs to be, I think anything that you resonate with that you can do best in the world, but in a lower carbon way, okay, will be interesting, because I do see a world where everything, like every business, consumer, and capital decision will be made out of climate data as well. So every product, every clothing item, every loan from a bank, every hiring decision, I don't know, like it should sort of proliferate, right? So anything that resonates with you doesn't need to be high tech or low tech or tech even, you know, but has a lower carbon intensity to current offerings.
So rethink everything. I love it. I really enjoy that. Actually, I was talking to a great friend of EnergyLab's via email, actually, and she talked about rethinking everything, but also just talking about substitutions and changing the way we live, I think, is also an interesting concept as well. So it's not just turning one thing into something that's decarbonised, it's also talking about something that we do and how can we change it so that it's entirely different. I think that's a very systems innovation way of thinking as well. I have got some pre-sent in audience questions. Some of the audience sent some questions in, so let's go to one of those. But please put them in the chat. Otherwise, I told you I will fill them up because I have got lots. The first one is, how do you plan on getting more people to own EVs? Now, in Australia, that is a long and complicated question, but Carola, you know this is coming to you first. So how do we plan on getting more people in Australia to own EVs? I'll give you 1 minute. No, I'm only joking. Please have a go at this question.
So the thing with electric cars is actually it's not a demand problem. Like, people want electric cars, but right now we have a supply issue. All the car manufacturers in the world can only produce a limited or a set amount of electric cars. And so if you are, let's say, a European car manufacturer, you sell your cars to Norway and France and Germany because that's your market, and that's where the policies around the market are very encouraging for the uptake. There's incentives, etc. So in Australia, we really need to get the policies right to encourage the car makers to bring more electric vehicles to the market, and then people will buy them. Recently, I think Hyundai launched a new set of cars being released to Australia. They were sold out online in 6 minutes. People didn't even test drive them. That's how much people want electric cars. We just don't have the supply at the moment.
Great, thank you very much. Now, another pre-sent in audience question. It's a little long, so bear with me because it's a good one. In keeping with the event title of Travel Guide to Decarbonisation, and with Australia so geographically isolated, so very true, making flights essential to travel here, if you want to physically be here, that is so very true. What do you see as the most important things to focus on for decarbonising aviation? Any volunteers to get stuck into that one, because it's big?
I can contribute.
Yeah, Camille,
shortly. Well, I think there are some alternative fuels being researched at the moment that look promising. And a radical answer is also telepresence. So context for this answer, I'm a huge fan of climate decarbonisation model called Project Drawdown. It lists 93 different climate solutions we need to transition the world to a net zero. I highly encourage everyone to have a look. Actually, we'll give you plenty of ideas in terms of what business you can start to solve the climate crisis. But one of the solution to air travel is to travel less. I know it's a bit radical, but a couple of years ago, we didn't travel that much in plane. We can also develop alternative ways of moving. I mean, not from Australia to other countries, but within Australia, I think we fly too much. I'm from France. We have really highly effective train systems, and I cannot see why this wouldn't be developed here in Australia. So public transport and high-speed efficient train, that I think that would be a solution to domestic travel.
Fantastic. Thank you, Camille. Now, we've got a question here from Tamara De Silva. How do you encourage those who do not come to the table to meet future sustainability demands? Do you have any interesting scenarios you could share with us? Does anyone want to have a shot at that question?
I think given that we don't have much time left, actually we don't have time anymore with the latest IPCC report, I would ignore for now these laggards, right? Because there's so much to be done with those who have, those who want to do things. To scale solutions, to start new solutions and all that. And I think laggards are laggards in every sector, right? They are laggards for a reason. And therefore they would just follow later on, right? Like I wouldn't worry about that. But to Jane's point earlier, as long as we also build for these laggards in mind, such that it's inclusive, it's accessible, like we don't ignore them in the design of the solutions, right? But I wouldn't... Yeah.
Maybe
so you wouldn't, don't code it for the 2%, cater for the 98%. I love that thought, Grace. And who was that? Sorry, was that you, Jane?
Yeah, I was just going to add to what Grace was saying, which was, yes, we're a climate company, but when we think about our product, it's about cost, it's about comfort, it's about control, and it's about climate. But you're designing for the 98%. And the 2% are the first adopters, but you've got to design for the end point because we don't have time to do multiple designs.
Thank you. That's great. And we've got a question here from Nick Blue. How do you convince more companies to focus on Scope 3 emissions when so many companies are maximising profit margins? It could be a similar answer. Would anyone like to have a look at that one?
I think that is actually the answer to the previous question, and that is taxing carbon emissions. Like any business that does not reduce the emissions or does not choose a product that is environmentally more responsible should be paying for polluting. I guess the world knows that they need to do it. We just need to really implement it and get better. But I'm very hopeful with the new government.
Fantastic.
Hopefully, we're not the handbrake on future climate summits and being discussed as going with Saudi Arabia and Russia against climate change.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Grace.
No, I'll just add something quickly because that's our specialization, right? With Scope 3. It's a funny one because Scope 3 is not a company's fault, but it is their problem. And because it's their problem, they have to care about it. Who makes it their problem, right? Governments, SBTi, stock exchanges. I need to study more the ASX mandates. I've contacted the ESG folks at ASX to learn more. But for SEC, for example, they've already pre-warned that all American listed companies need to disclose their Scope 3. So unfortunately, Nick is right in the sense that companies, if given a choice, would rather not care about their supply chain emissions, would rather not. But if not given a choice, they have to. And I think it is that one scope that would need regulatory pressures a lot more.
Fantastic, thank you. And that brings us to an end of our time with the panel. So I would very much like to thank Grace, Camille, Jane, and Carola for your time. That was amazing. It was so fantastic to thank you all, to chat with you all. Thank you so much for sharing your journeys and your insights with us all. I really appreciated it. And we are now going to hand over to Kate.
Thank you, Megan. And I would just like to echo what Megan said. Thank you to Grace, Carola, Jane, and Camille. And also thank you to Megan for moderating the panel. And it's been so great to have such an international panel with Grace in Singapore and Jane in California, Camille in Brisbane, and Carola in Sydney, something that we wouldn't have been able to do in person. So that's been really wonderful. I hope everyone's feeling as inspired as me from these incredible and inspiring women working in such an important area of decarbonisation. And thank you again to the City of Sydney for supporting this event. And be sure to check out the last couple of events before the end of the program. If you would like to know more about EnergyLab, please check out our website. And to keep up to date with all things climate tech startup ecosystem, you can subscribe to our monthly newsletter. And for announcements, follow us on LinkedIn. If you want to do more for the community, we have an amazing network of mentors and angel investors that you can get involved in. And I will pop all that info in the chat. Thank you again so much to everyone for being here and enjoy the rest of your days. Thanks again.